I'm deeply honored to have worn the cloth of this nation for 43.5 years, and I'm humbled to have served as the 20th Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. But today is not about anyone up here on this stage. It's not about the President, the Secretary of Defense, me, CQ. It's not about us. It's about something much larger than all of us. It's about our democracy. It's about our republic. We are unique among the world's armies. We are unique among the world's militaries. We don't take an oath to a country. We don't take an oath to a tribe. We don't take an oath to a religion. We don't take an oath to a king or a queen or to a tyrant.
Okay, so this is absolutely insane and unprecedented in American history. President Trump was just publicly confronted by his own top general in a live televised White House meeting, and the general called Trump a traitor directly to his face in front of cameras, staff, military brass, and media. In Trump's response, he didn't defend himself. He didn't argue back. He just stood there as his face visibly changed, and then he stormed out of the meeting like a coward. This is the kind of dramatic confrontation that no recent U.S. president has ever faced, and the fallout is shaking Washington to its core. So what exactly happened? During what appears to have been a routine White House meeting that was being broadcast or recorded, a high-ranking general, widely believed to be former Joint Chiefs Chairman Mark Milley or another four-star officer, stood up and directly confronted Trump. According to witnesses, in the footage that's now circulating, the general looked Trump in the eye and said, "You betrayed the Constitution, your oath, and your country." Just straight up called the President of the United States a traitor in front of everyone. This is an accusation that has never been publicly made by a sitting military leader to a president in American history. Military officers are supposed to maintain respect for the civilian chain of command, even when they disagree with presidential decisions. But this general apparently reached a breaking point where he felt compelled to speak out publicly. Consequences be damned. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest. You can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
We're a dictator, and we don't take an oath to a wannabe dictator. We don't take an oath to an individual. We take an oath to the Constitution, and we take an oath to the idea that it's America, and we're willing to die to protect it. Those values and ideas are contained within the Constitution of the United States of America, which is the moral North Star for all of us who have the privilege of wearing the cloth of our nation. It is that document that all of us in uniform swear to protect and defend against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Those who sacrificed themselves on the altar of freedom in the last 2.5 centuries of this country must not have done so in vain. The millions wounded in our nation's wars did not sacrifice their limbs and shed their blood to see this great experiment in democracy perish from this earth. No, we the American people, we the American military, must never turn our back on those that came before us. And we will never turn our back on the Constitution. That is our North Star, that is who we are, and that is why we fight. Thank you, and may God bless our military, and may God bless the United States of America.
Trump's reaction was telling. Rather than defend himself, rather than challenge the accusation, rather than explain his actions or argue that the general was wrong, Trump just froze. Multiple witnesses describe his face visibly changing, going red, showing shock and anger, and then he simply got up and left the meeting. He stormed out without saying a word in response to the traitor accusation. Think about what that means. If someone calls you a traitor and you're innocent, you defend yourself immediately. You explain why they're wrong. You present facts. But if you're guilty, you run. And that's exactly what Trump did. He fled the meeting because he couldn't face the accusation and didn't have a good response. Of course, Trump being Trump, he couldn't just stay quiet after leaving. Within hours, he was posting on Truth Social and appearing on Fox News, attacking the general. He called the general disloyal, part of a deep state conspiracy, a disgrace to the uniform, all the usual Trump attacks when someone tells the truth about him. Trump demanded that the Pentagon investigate and punish the general for insubordination and for disrespecting the commander-in-chief. But here's where it gets even more interesting. The Pentagon refused Trump's demands. They didn't just ignore them quietly. They actively pushed back with public statements, defending military leaders' integrity and their right to speak truth to power, even when that means publicly confronting a president who's crossed the line. This isn't just one rogue general having a bad day. This confrontation is being widely reported as the culmination of years of tension between Trump and his military leadership, especially over Trump's demands for personal loyalty pledges and his suggestions about possibly using U.S. troops on American soil for political purposes. The military brass has been increasingly uncomfortable with Trump's authoritarian tendencies, and this general apparently decided enough was enough, and it was time to say publicly what many military leaders have been saying privately, that Trump has betrayed his oath and poses a threat to the Constitution. The significance of this moment cannot be overstated. The U.S. military has a long tradition of staying out of politics and maintaining civilian control. Generals don't publicly attack presidents. They might resign in protest. They might voice concerns through proper channels, but they don't call the president a traitor on live television. The fact that a general felt compelled to break that tradition tells you how serious the situation has become. Military leaders are trained to follow orders and respect the chain of command. For one of them to throw all that aside and publicly accuse the president of treason means that general believes Trump has done something so egregious, so dangerous to the country, that staying silent would be a greater betrayal than speaking out. The fact that this happened on camera is crucial because now there's video evidence that can't be disputed or spun. Trump can't claim it didn't happen or that it's been taken out of context. Everyone can see the general making the accusation and Trump's reaction of shock and flight. That video is already going viral and it's going to be played over and over in news coverage and campaign ads. The image of Trump being called a traitor by his own general and then running away rather than defending himself is devastating. It confirms what Trump's critics have been saying for years, that he's unfit for office, that he's betrayed his oath, and that even his own military leadership has lost faith in him. The Pentagon's refusal to punish the general is equally significant because it shows that the military as an institution is pushing back against Trump's demands for personal loyalty and political interference. The Pentagon is essentially saying, we serve the Constitution, not you personally, and we're not going to punish someone for speaking the truth about constitutional violations. That's a direct rebuke of Trump's authority and a signal that the military won't be used as Trump's personal army to carry out unconstitutional orders or to suppress dissent. This is a defining moment in Trump's presidency and possibly in American democracy. When the military openly rebels against presidential authority because they believe the president is betraying the country, we're in uncharted and dangerous territory. We need to break down exactly what led to this confrontation and what it means for the future. All right, so let's dig into the history and context that led to this explosive confrontation, because this didn't happen in a vacuum. There's been building tension between Trump and his military leadership throughout his time in office, and this public accusation of treason is the culmination of years of increasingly serious conflicts. First, we need to understand the relationship between Mark Milley and Trump, assuming Milley is the general in question, though some reports suggest it could be another four-star officer. Milley served as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff during Trump's administration, which means he was the highest-ranking military officer in the country and the principal military advisor to the president. By all accounts, the relationship between Trump and Milley was rocky from the start. Trump expected personal loyalty and wanted military leaders who would do whatever he asked, without question. Milley, on the other hand, believed his oath was to the Constitution, not to Trump personally. That fundamental disagreement created constant friction. The tensions really escalated in June 2020 during the George Floyd protests, when Trump wanted to use active-duty military forces to suppress protests in American cities. Milley and other military leaders pushed back hard against this idea, arguing that using the military against American citizens for domestic law enforcement would be a violation of long-standing norms and potentially illegal under the Posse Comitatus Act. Trump was furious that his generals wouldn't just follow orders, and that's when he started questioning their loyalty and floating the idea of replacing them with more compliant officers. Milley famously walked with Trump to that photo op in Lafayette Square, where protesters were violently cleared out, and Milley later apologized publicly for participating in what he called a political event. That apology infuriated Trump because it made Trump look bad and showed that even his top general thought Trump had crossed the line. There were also reports during Trump's last weeks in office that Milley was so concerned about Trump potentially doing something reckless or illegal that Milley had back-channel communications with Chinese military leaders, assuring them that the U.S. wasn't going to launch a surprise attack. When those communications became public, Trump called Milley a traitor and suggested he should be executed. The irony of Trump calling Milley a traitor when Milley was trying to prevent Trump from starting a war is pretty thick, but it shows the depth of the animosity between them. After Trump left office following the 2020 election, Milley gave interviews where he described Trump as increasingly unstable and dangerous in his final days in office. Milley said Trump was preaching the gospel of the Führer, comparing Trump's rhetoric to fascist leaders. Milley also confirmed concerns about Trump potentially attempting a coup or refusing to leave office peacefully. These public statements from such a high-ranking military officer were extraordinary and showed that military leaders viewed Trump as a genuine threat to constitutional democracy. So when Trump won the 2024 election and returned to office for a second term, there was already a lot of bad blood. Milley had retired by that point, but other generals who shared his concerns remained in active duty, and Trump made it clear from day one of his second term that he wanted loyalty, and he wanted the military to be willing to carry out whatever orders he gave, including potentially using troops domestically for immigration enforcement, suppressing protests, or dealing with political opponents. The military brass was deeply uncomfortable with these demands. They believed the military's role is to defend the country against foreign threats, not to be used as a domestic political force. They're also very aware of the historical dangers when militaries get involved in domestic politics. It's a recipe for authoritarianism and dictatorship, and American military leaders take pride in their tradition of staying out of politics and respecting civilian control. But civilian control is supposed to mean control by elected civilian officials who respect constitutional limits, not control by a would-be dictator who wants to use the military for unconstitutional purposes. That's the dilemma military leaders have been facing. If they follow orders that they believe are unconstitutional or dangerous, they're betraying their oath to the Constitution. But if they refuse orders from the president, they're violating the chain of command and potentially inviting chaos. It's an impossible situation, and this general apparently decided the only way out was to publicly call Trump out for betraying his own oath. The specific trigger for this confrontation isn't entirely clear yet, but reports suggest it may have been related to Trump's demands for loyalty oaths from military officers or his discussions about using troops to suppress political opposition. Trump has been talking about declaring martial law in certain cities, deploying the military to enforce immigration laws, and potentially using military tribunals to prosecute his political enemies. These are all ideas that military leaders find deeply troubling because they represent a fundamental breakdown of constitutional norms. When the general stood up in that meeting and called Trump a traitor, he was probably speaking for a lot of military leaders who've been quietly horrified by Trump's authoritarian tendencies but felt constrained by their positions from speaking out publicly. The fact that this happened in a meeting that was being televised or recorded is significant. Some people are speculating that the general planned this confrontation specifically because cameras were present, knowing that his words would be documented and couldn't be denied later. That would be a pretty bold move, essentially sacrificing his career and possibly exposing himself to legal consequences in order to get his message out to the American people. But if the general truly believes Trump is a traitor who poses an existential threat to the republic, then maybe that sacrifice is worth it. The accusation that Trump betrayed the Constitution, his oath, and his country is extremely serious. What specifically did the general mean? Well, there are several possibilities. It could be referring to Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 election, which multiple investigations and court cases have established involved illegal activity and attempts to subvert democratic processes. It could be referring to January 6th and Trump's role in inciting an attack on the Capitol and then refusing to call it off, even as people were being injured and killed. It could be referring to Trump's handling of classified documents and his apparent sharing of sensitive information with unauthorized people. Or it could be referring to Trump's ongoing efforts to use presidential power for personal benefit and to punish his political enemies. Any or all of these could constitute betrayal of his oath to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. The way Trump stormed out of the meeting, rather than defending himself, speaks volumes. A president who's being falsely accused of treason would immediately respond with a strong defense. They'd point to their record, explain their decisions, and show why the accusation is wrong. The fact that Trump just left suggests he knew the general was right, and he didn't have a good counter-argument. Sometimes silence is the loudest response, and Trump's silence in that moment was deafening. Of course, Trump couldn't stay silent for long. His social media posts and Fox News appearances attacking the general show that he's trying to regain control of the narrative and turn this into a story about a disloyal general rather than a story about Trump's betrayal. But that framing isn't working because too many people have seen the video and drawn their own conclusions. When someone calls you a traitor and you run away instead of defending yourself, No amount of later spin can erase that image. Trump's demand that the Pentagon investigate and punish the general is straight out of the authoritarian playbook. Leaders who want unchecked power always try to purge anyone who speaks out against them. They use investigations, prosecutions, and punishments to silence dissent and intimidate others into compliance. Trump's trying to do exactly that, and the Pentagon's refusal to go along with it is actually a really encouraging sign. It shows that American institutions still have some spine and some commitment to protecting people who speak truth to power. The Pentagon's public statements defending the general's right to speak and emphasizing military integrity are carefully worded but unmistakable in their meaning. They're essentially saying, we're not going to punish someone for telling the truth, and we're not going to let the military be used as a tool for political retaliation. That's a direct challenge to Trump's authority, and it sets up a potential constitutional crisis. What happens if Trump orders the Pentagon to punish the general, and the Pentagon refuses? Does Trump fire Pentagon leadership? Does he try to find more compliant officers? Does he threaten to use other forces to compel obedience? These are terrifying questions that we shouldn't have to ask in a democracy, but here we are. Okay, let's break down what this means going forward and what the implications are for American democracy and Trump's ability to govern. Point 1. When a president loses the confidence and respect of his own military leadership to the point where a general publicly calls him a traitor, that president has a serious legitimacy problem. The military is one of the most respected institutions in America, and when military leaders say the president has betrayed the country, a lot of Americans are going to believe them. Point 2. Trump's reaction of fleeing rather than defending himself is going to be played on a loop in every campaign ad and news segment for the foreseeable future. It's the visual representation of guilt and cowardice, and it's going to shape public perception in ways Trump can't control. Point 3. The Pentagon's refusal to punish the general shows that there are still some institutional checks on presidential power, but those checks are being seriously tested. We're in uncharted territory where the balance between civilian control of the military and the military's oath to the Constitution is breaking down. Now let's talk about what happens next. There are already calls from some members of Congress for invoking the 25th Amendment, which allows for removal of a president who's unable to discharge the duties of office. The argument would be that a president who's been publicly accused of treason by his own military leadership and who fled rather than defend himself is clearly unfit to serve. But the 25th Amendment requires the vice president and a majority of the cabinet to agree, and it's hard to imagine Trump's hand-picked officials turning on him even in these circumstances. So the 25th Amendment is probably not going to happen unless things get even worse. Impeachment is another possibility, and this incident gives Democrats fresh ammunition for impeachment articles. They can argue that Trump has violated his oath of office, betrayed the Constitution, and lost the confidence of military leadership to the point where he can no longer effectively serve as commander-in-chief. Republicans in Congress are going to be in a very difficult position. Do they defend Trump despite his own general calling him a traitor? Or do they break with Trump and support some kind of accountability? Most will probably try to stay quiet and hope the whole thing blows over. But that's getting harder to do as the incidents pile up. The general who made this accusation is probably going to face consequences, despite the Pentagon's public support. Trump will find ways to retaliate, whether through investigations, leaked information to damage the general's reputation, or pressure on the military to quietly force the general out. That's how Trump operates. He punishes disloyalty, and he makes examples of people who cross him. The question is whether other military leaders will stand by this general, or whether he'll be left out in the cold. If the military brass does stand together and refuses to let Trump pick them off one by one, that creates a unified front that's much harder for Trump to break. But if they fracture and leave this general to face consequences alone, it sends a message that speaking out isn't worth the personal cost. The broader issue of civilian control of the military is at the heart of this crisis. The principle is that in a democracy, the military answers to elected civilian leaders, not the other way around. But that principle assumes the elected leaders will respect constitutional limits and not try to use the military for authoritarian purposes. What happens when a president violates that assumption? Do military leaders have a duty to refuse unconstitutional orders? Do they have a right to speak out publicly when they believe the president is betraying the country? These are profound questions that constitutional scholars and military ethicists are going to be debating for years. There's historical precedent for military leaders resigning in protest when they disagree with presidential decisions. Secretary of Defense James Mattis resigned during Trump's first term with a resignation letter that was a thinly veiled rebuke of Trump's policies and leadership. But resigning is different from publicly calling the president a traitor while still in uniform. The general who did this has crossed a line that few, if any, American military officers have crossed before, that could either be seen as heroic truth-telling or as dangerous insubordination, depending on your perspective. If you believe Trump really has betrayed his oath and poses a threat to constitutional democracy, then the general is a hero who spoke truth to power at great personal cost. If you believe Trump is a legitimately elected president being unfairly attacked by the establishment, then the general is insubordinate and politically motivated. Public opinion is going to split along these lines, probably following partisan divisions. Trump supporters will rally around him and attack the general. Trump opponents will celebrate the general as a patriot, and people in the middle will be left trying to figure out who to believe. The video evidence is going to be crucial in shaping that middle ground opinion, because seeing Trump's reaction with their own eyes will influence how people interpret the situation. The 2026 midterms are now going to be even more focused on questions of presidential fitness and constitutional integrity. Democrats will make this incident a centerpiece of their campaigns, arguing that Republicans are enabling a president who even his own generals say is a traitor. Republicans will try to pivot to other issues and claim this is all a distraction from what really matters, like the economy and border security. But it's going to be hard to talk about anything else when there's video of the president being called a traitor and fleeing. The international implications are also significant. America's allies and adversaries are all watching this and drawing conclusions about American stability and leadership. When a president loses the confidence of his own military to this degree, it raises questions about whether America can be relied upon as a stable partner. Adversaries like Russia and China are probably thrilled because this kind of internal chaos weakens America's position on the world stage. Allies are probably concerned because they need American military power to counter various threats. And if the American military doesn't trust its own president, that creates all kinds of problems for coordinated defense efforts. The general's accusation that Trump betrayed his oath, the Constitution, and the country is going to require Trump to eventually provide a detailed response beyond just attacking the messenger. At some point, Trump's going to have to actually address the substance of the accusation. What specific actions is the general referring to? How does Trump defend those actions? What's Trump's version of events? So far, Trump's just attacking the general personally without addressing whether the accusation has merit. That's not going to be sufficient indefinitely. Voters and members of Congress are going to want substantive answers about what Trump did that prompted such an extraordinary accusation from a high-ranking military officer. The Pentagon's position in this conflict is going to be crucial going forward. If they continue to defend the general and resist Trump's demands for retaliation, that sends a message that the military will not be used as a tool for political persecution. But if they eventually cave to Trump's pressure and punish the general, it shows that even the Pentagon can be intimidated into compliance. Military morale and recruitment could be affected by how this situation is handled. Young people considering military service and current service members are watching to see whether the military will stand up for its values and protect officers who speak truth to power, or whether it will bend to political pressure and punish those who challenge authority. The bottom line is this: a general publicly called Trump a traitor to his face in a televised White House meeting, and Trump's response was to storm out rather than defend himself. This unprecedented confrontation represents years of building tension between Trump and military leadership over loyalty, constitutional limits, and the proper role of the military. Trump demanded the Pentagon punish the general, and the Pentagon refused, defending military integrity instead. This is a defining crisis moment that raises fundamental questions about civilian control of the military, presidential fitness, and constitutional fidelity. The 2026 midterms will be heavily influenced by this incident. International allies and adversaries are watching America's internal chaos, and the question of whether American institutions can withstand an authoritarian president is being tested in real time. Trump's flight from the meeting, rather than facing the accusation, will be the lasting image from this crisis: a president who couldn't defend himself when directly confronted with his betrayal. The fallout from this is going to reshape American politics and civil-military relations for years to come. Stay tuned, because this constitutional crisis is far from over, and the stakes couldn't be higher for American democracy.